Ayo, I wanted to make a Seikret from Monster Hunter Wilds, and so I did. Here's what I did. Firstly though, I just want to say thanks to YouTube for sending me my 100 subscribers plaque. And also, thank you to everyone who's clicked subscribe so far. But as usual, we're going to start by adding foil to my trusty wooden block. I'm going to be making a rock for these Seikret to stand on first, so I'm going to be using some Fimo clay. Not by choice, I have this stuff in excess, and I'm just trying to get rid of it because I absolutely hate using this stuff. I couldn't really tell you why, but I've used it a lot in the past and I've not had much success at all, really. Nevertheless, I'm going to bash the clay with rocks until I get a rocky texture, and then just like the professional I am, realise I've done this way too small. Now at this point, I quite quickly realise why I stopped using this clay, and so I started again with a bigger base of foil and then added the clay. Once I've added all the rocky texture, I can bake it in the oven and then get to tearing away at the clay with a craft knife and then ripping the pieces off as to give it an even more rugged texture. Now to save on resources, I can use some of these as rocks later on the base and then totally not forget to use them in any way. Now that I have my rock, I can construct some armature wire for my Seikret and then drill some holes for him to stand on. After faffing around for way too long trying to get the wire to be sturdy in the block, I just switched to the method I used last time with the welding rods. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I realise that we're nearly 2.5 minutes into this video and I'm only just positioning my Seikret, but just bear with me. After getting the Seikret, who I'm just going to call Steve from now on, into the tried and true, one leg standing on a rock pose, I can finally bust out some cosplay to bulk him up. I'm just going to follow the basic shape of a velociraptor for its legs and torso, but the Seikret is more so based on an Archaeopteryx, as you can see from the feather placement. As we move on to Steve's head, I'm going to really take my time laying out his defining features like his beak and the spikes on the back of his head. For the arms, some armature wire gets shoved into the clay to map out how big they're going to be before popping them off to add the claws separately. And thankfully, with the power of editing, I only have to make one. The original plan was to have one of Steve's arms gripping the rock as though he was about to go on all fours, but I could not for the life of me get this to look right, so I'll make them a little bit shorter shortly. To make his little feet, I'm squishing some wormy-dealies down into his stub and then pushing some pre-baked claws into them and shaping them up accordingly. Oh yeah, his neck was looking too stubby, so I made it a tad bit longer. For his torso feathers, I can use my tactic of almost slicing the clay with a sharp-ish tool in a roundabout shape of the feather, and then absolutely lathering it in isopropanol alcohol. Then I can repeat this over and over and over and over until Steve gets a decent looking chest of feathers. To texture his face, I'm laying down some cling film and then using a teeny tiny ball stylus to make little scales. I'm basically getting the head out of the way first as I hold onto the base of the sculpt a lot and often end up smudging everything. Then I can lay down lots of little wrinkles in appropriate places, wherever I think they might be given the pose he's in. After placing some thicker armor plate type scales on his thick thighs, I can do the same texture thing I did to his face, on his legs, and also all over most of his body. Once Steve gets a nice, well-deserved bake in the oven, I can shape a saddle into place, followed by a little blanket that goes on top, and to texture it, I'm going to use a sheet of toilet paper and then press it down. And what's good about doing this is I'll eventually indent a pattern into the blanket, rendering this whole thing pointless. Now, honestly, I don't really know what half the things I'm adding onto this saddle are. I'm just following the reference photos. Onto Steve's tail. To make the feathers, I'm making lots of tiny long triangles that get squished on, followed by another row of tiny long triangles, and then carving the shape of other tiny long triangles on top to give the illusion that I spent more time on this than I actually did. Now, while adding the feathers to Steve's feet, I completely forgot about this little stubby toe thing he has right there. But then I did the same thing that I did with the feathers on his tail to both of his arms. Now, I've been completely putting off doing the feathers on his head, and I'm going to be honest, I was terrified that I'd make the clay way too long and thin, and then when I baked it in the oven, it'll just soften and sag, and it looked like Steve just got out of the bath. But after too long procrastinating and not coming up with any other solution, I figured I'd just try it out and see what happens. As to not make this video even longer than it already is, I made his little gubbins off camera. So he gets his little face shield thing, a backpack for the saddle, a rolled up blanket thing, and a weapons bag. But these aren't being attached just yet, as I'm going to paint them all separately. Now, I made all the straps, belts and intricacies on his head off camera as well, as the model was that close to my face while doing it that you'd only be able to see my nose. Then I can turn my sculpting setup into a painting setup, and I can prime Steve white. Now, luckily, I have a built-in excuse for the painting process, as you can customize the colour of your Seikret in Monster Hunter Wilds, and this means that Steve's colours came out absolutely perfectly. And I did not at all start out trying to make his colour scheme exactly like the original, but ended up being way too oversaturated. Nope, it came out fine. I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, I wish I could tell you what I was doing with this paint job, but sadly I don't even know that, so enjoy my lack of commentary for a bit. Well, that's just about the base of him all painted up, and I've got to say, not too shabby. So the bag gets painted, the weapon bag gets painted, and this random rolled up blanket thing gets painted. And I also made some stirrups. Oh yeah, and these two little get painted as well. Then I can get to gluing all of Steve's gubbins in place, and I started off using hot glue, but then I got the placement slightly wrong and ripped it off along with some of the paint job, and then switched to super glue. I'm not sure what it is about hot glue, but I think it's just a skill issue. Onto the base, I can mark out an oval shape on some chipboard and then film a horrible transition. Then I can paint the rock in a light sandstone base colour, followed by a dark wash that seeps into all the cracks. I can then dab away at the top layer with a piece of tissue before dry brushing progressively lighter shades of this sand colour on top, and then finally a very fine layer of white around the edges. I'm going to mix up some one strike hole filler, some Mod Podge, and some of the same paints I used on the rock. And for the texture, I'm just going to use some sand. Honestly, I think I enjoy this part of the dioramas the most, as I can just be straight up messy as f***, and somehow it ends up looking good. This finer, lighter sand here, in my opinion, absolutely saved the day for this base. It blends the sand in with the rock perfectly, and it's not too much of the same colour, but it also gives a perfect contrast, and if I do say so myself, I've absolutely killed it this time with the base. Finally, the tub of tufts gets busted out, and I'm going to use the same tufts as I did with the Pookie Pookie in the last video, and stick these down haphazardly. Hey, remember those rocks I said I was going to use? Okay, I lied. The last thing I need to do is to give Steve's eyes a nice shine with some UV resin, along with his Seikret. Anyway, onto the glamour shots.